After years of unanswered prayers, she hears an unnatural cry from the water. A strange, pale skinned baby floats towards her, its knowing eyes filled with mystery. The moment she lifts the child, the world feels eerie silent, except for a distinct, unseen laughter from the depths of the river. Ignoring all warnings, she claims the child as her own, unaware of the dark forces watching. Long ago, in the great kingdom of Tewanye, Queen Mnena sat by her window, staring at the moon. Her heart was heavy like a stone at the bottom of the river. The wind whispered through the trees, but she did not hear it. The crickets sang in the night, but she did not care. She had everything: gold, fine clothes, servants who bowed at her feet. But there was one thing she did not have: a child. For many years she prayed. She went to the great shrine of Beta, offering white doves and sweet palm wine. She bathed in the river at dawn, hoping the waters would bless her womb. But her arms remained empty, and her people began to whisper. A queen who cannot bear a child is like a tree without fruit, they said. Who will sit on the throne when the king grows old? The gods must be angry with her. Her husband, King Tobem, was a mighty warrior, but even he could not fight fate. At first, he comforted her, saying, "The gods will bless us in their time." But as the years passed, his patience thinned. He spent more time in the war camp, less time in their chambers. One evening, as Mnena sat alone in the palace garden, a shadow moved beside her. It was Konkwase, the oldest woman in the kingdom. Her back was bent like an old tree, and her eyes were cloudy with age. But her voice was as strong as thunder. "The river sees all things," she said. "It hears the cries of mothers and the laughters of children. If you truly seek a child, go to the Moon River before the first rooster crows." Nena's heart pounded. "And what will I find there?" Konkwase smiled, showing her toothless gums. "A gift, but beware, my queen. Not all gifts come without a price." The wind blew cold against Mnena's skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, but the old woman was already gone, fading into the night like smoke. Would the river truly hear her cry? Or was this just another false hope? Nena did not know, but as the stars shone above her, she made a decision. Before the rooster crowed, she would go to the river, even if it meant paying a price she could not yet see. That night, Queen Mnena barely slept. When she closed her eyes, she saw the river. The water shone like silver in the moonlight, calling her name. A voice, soft like the wind, whispered, "Come, child, your tears have filled the earth. Come and take what you seek." Nena woke with a start. The palace was silent, but her heart pounded like a talking drum. She knew what she had to do. She wrapped herself in a dark cloak and slipped through the halls like a shadow. The guards at the gate were asleep, their spears resting against the wall. She moved quickly, her bare foot silent on the cold ground. The night air was heavy with scent of wet earth. Owls hooted from the trees, and in the distance a hyena laughed. But Nena did not stop. She followed the windy path through the forest, her hand brushing against the rough bark of ancient trees. The river was close. She could hear it murmuring, a deep and endless song. Finally, she reached the Moon River. The water shimmered under the moonlight, moving like a living thing. The queen fell to her knees at the river bank, her hands trembling. "Oh, great river, mother of all waters," she whispered, "I have come to beg for your mercy. Give me a child, and I will give you whatever you ask in return." The wind packed up, stirring the water. The river swayed and rose, forming the shape of a woman. Her skin was dark and glistering, like the night sky after rain. Her hair was long, floating around her like mist. Her eyes, deep as the ocean, held secrets older than time. I have heard your cry, Nena, the woman said. Her voice was calm, yet it echoed like thunder. You desire a child, but you understand the weight of your wish. Tears rolled down Nena's face. I do, great mother. I will love the child with all my heart. I will protect and cherish them forever. The river woman stepped forward, her feet barely touching the water. Then take what the river gives. But remember, all things belongs to the water in the end. With that, she vanished and the river calmed. Nena gasped for breath, her heart racing. Was it real? Had she imagined it? Then she saw it, floating on the river, caught between the reeds, a small basket. Her hands shook as she pulled it to shore. Inside, wrapped in white cloth, was a baby girl. Nena's breath caught in her throat. The child's skin was smooth and cool. Her tiny fingers coiled into fists, but it was her eyes that took the queen's breath away. Deep, glowing blue, like the heart of the river. Tears filled Nena's eyes. The river had given her a child, a daughter. She pressed the baby to her chest and whispered, Your name shall be Yua, the beautiful gift. The queen did not see the shadow in the water. She did not hear the soft laughter carried by the wind. She only saw her child, perfect and whole. And so, without knowing what fate had set in motion, Queen Mnena carried the river's gift back to the palace. The palace was still asleep when Queen Mnena returned. She held Yua close, afraid the child would disappear like a dream if she let go. Inside her chambers, she lit a small lamp and unwrapped the baby. Yua's tiny chest rose and fell, her breath soft as whispers. But as Nena touched her, she felt it again. Her skin was cool, almost like fresh river water. The queen shivered, pushing away her fear. This is my child, my daughter. The gods have finally blessed me. As the first rays of the sun peeked through the window, a knock came at the door. My queen, a servant called. The king is awake. He asks for you. Nena's heart raced. She had not told her husband where she had gone. What would he say when he saw the child? She took a deep breath, wrapped Yua in a soft cloth, and went to meet the king. King Tobem sat on his great chair, rubbing his forehead. His warriors stood at his side, speaking of war and distant lands, but they barely listened. Then Nena entered, holding the child. The room fell silent. The king's eyes widened. What is this? Nena stepped forward, her voice steady. She is our daughter, my king. The gods have finally answered our prayers. The warriors exchanged glances. The chief priest frowned. Tobem stood, his gaze fixed on the baby. Where did she come from? Nena hesitated. She was given to me. By who? The river. A deep murmur spread through the room. The chief priest stepped forward, his face dark with worry. A child from the river? He said. My queen, this is no ordinary child. Nena held Yua tighter. She is a gift, a blessing. The king looked at the baby again. She yawned, her tiny hands reaching out. For a moment, the hardness in his eyes softened. She is beautiful, he murmured. Truly, the gods have been kind. Nena smiled. Her name is Yua. The king nodded. Then let the drums be sounded. Let the people know the queen has given us a child. Cheers filled the palace. The people danced in the streets. The king himself lifted Yua high, showing her to the crowd. That night, the kingdom of Tewanye rejoiced. But far away, at the edge of the river, the water rippled, and unseen eyes watched. The river never gives without taking, and soon it would come to claim what was its own. Years passed and Yua grew. She was not like other children. Her skin was always cool to the touch, even under the scorching sun. Her hair never tangled, no matter how the wind blew. It was her eyes that made the people whisper, deep glowing blue, like the heart of the river. The servants in the palace were afraid of her. They said strange things happened when she was near. One day, the royal gardener found his dry, withered plants suddenly booming after Yua had walked past. Another time, the chief cook spilled hot soup, but before it could touch Yua's skin, the liquid froze into ice. She is not like us, the people whispered. She is something else. But Queen Mnena loved her child. She refused to listen to the whispers. My daughter is special, she told King Tobem. The gods have blessed her. The king was not so sure. He had seen the fear in the people's eyes. He had heard their priest's warning. She is a child of water, the priest had said, and water does not forget its own. Still, the king pushed his worries aside. His daughter was healthy. She was strong. What more could he ask for? One evening, as the sun deepened low, Yua wandered to the palace fountain. She dipped her fingers into the water, watching the ripples spread. Then something strange happened. The water rose, dancing in the air like a snake chamber's flute. It twisted and coiled, following the movement of her hands. Yua gasped. Pulling back, the water fell with a soft splash. She looked around. Had anyone seen? She turned to leave and stopped. At the far end of the courtyard, a woman stood watching. She was dressed in flowing blue robes, her long dark hair swaying with the breeze. But it was her eyes that held Yua's breath, deep glowing blue like her own. The woman smiled. You are finally ready to hear the truth. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. The wind carried her whisper. The river has not forgotten you. Yua ran back inside, her heart pounding. Something was coming, something she did not understand. That night, Yua could not sleep. The woman's voice echoed in her mind. Who was she? What did she mean? She tossed and turned, but her thought would not rest. Finally, she slipped out of bed and crept through the palace halls. The moonlight guided her steps, leading her towards the royal garden, towards the fountain. When she reached it, the water was still, quiet, but as she knelt beside it, a ripple spread across the surface. Then another. Then Yua, she gasped. The water was speaking. Her hands trembled, but she could not look away. Come to the river, child. The truth awaits for you. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She turned to run, and she crashed straight into someone. Yua, it was Queen Mnena. Her mother's eyes were filled with worry. What are you doing out here? Yua opened her mouth, then closed it. How could she explain? Nena knelt and cupped her daughter's face. Tell me, my child, what troubles you? Yua hesitated, then whispered, The river speaks to me. The queen's face went pale. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she took Yua's hand. Come, she said. There is something you must know. Together, they walked back to the palace. The night was silent, but the wind carried a distinct sound, the murmur of the river calling its child home. Inside the palace, Queen Mnena sat Yua down. Her hands trembled as she held her daughter close. There is something I have never told you, she said. Yua's heart pounded. What is it, Mama? The queen took a deep breath. Many years ago, I went to the river, she began. I was desperate for a child. I prayed, I cried, I begged the girls. She paused, her eyes distant. And then I found you. Yua froze. What do you mean? She whispered. Queen Mnena's voice broke. You were not born to me, she said. I took you from the water. Silence filled the room. The queen held her daughter's hand tightly. her eyes pleading. I raised you, I loved you, but now the river calls you back. Yua shook her head. No, she said, you are my mother. Nena pulled her close, holding her tightly. You will always be my child, she whispered, no matter what. But deep in her heart, she knew the river does not forget. And soon it would come to claim its own. The next morning, Yua awoke with a strange feeling in her chest. She walked to the mirror and gasped. A shimmery blue mark had appeared on her arm, swirling like waves in the ocean. It pulsed with a soft light, like the heartbeat of the river itself. She covered it quickly. She could not let anyone see. Outside, the palace was buzzing. People whispered in fear. The river is rising, the guards said. The waters are restless. Yua's breath quickened. She knew it was because of her. That night, she stood by the fountain once more. The water rippled. Come, child, the river whispered. Yua clenched her fist. She did not want to go. This was her home, but in her heart she knew she could not run from what she was, and the river would never stop calling. At dawn, Yua made her choice. She wrapped herself in a simple cloth, hiding the mark on her arm. She would go to the river. She would find the woman in blue, and she would learn the truth. Queen Mnena found her as she was leaving. Where are you going? Her mother asked, fear in her eyes. Yua hesitated. I have to know who I am, she said. Tears filled the queen's eye. I cannot stop you, she whispered. But promise me, no matter what happens, you will return to me. Yua nodded. I promise. Then she turned and walked into the night, towards the river, towards her fate. The wind whispered around her. The water rolled in distance. The river had been waiting. And now its child was coming home. Yua reached the river just as the first light of dawn touched the sky. The water shimmered, dark and endless, moving as if it were alive. She stood at the edge, her heart pounding. Then, from the depths, she saw her. The woman in blue rose from the water, her skin glowing like the moon, her eyes deep like the ocean. Her voice was gentle, yet powerful. You have come, my child. Yua stepped back. I am not your child, she said. I belong to my mother, the queen. The woman smiled, sadness in her eyes. She raised you, yes. She loved you, yes. But you were never hers to keep. Yua's breath hitched. Who am I? She whispered. The woman touched Yua's forehead. The word spun. Memories flooded her mind. She saw herself as a baby, floating in the river, cuddled by the water. She saw spirits whispered over her, their voices like the rush of waves. She saw herself growing, changing, her body always connected to the water. Yua fell to her knees, gasping. You are the river's daughter, the woman said softly. Tears welled in Yua's eyes. She did not want to be the river's daughter. She just wanted to be herself. The river mother stretched out her hand. Come with me, child. It is time to return. Yua's heart pounded. If she left, she would never see her mother again, never walk the palace hall, never live as a human. But if she stayed, the river would never rest. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I don't want to leave, she whispered. The river mother sighed. You were born of water, you are. The longer you stay on land, the more you will suffer. The mark on your arm is only the beginning. Soon, your body will weaken. Your soul will wither. The river will always call you. Yua clenched her fist. There had to be another way. She would not abandon her mother. She would not abandon herself. And so she made her choice. She will return to the palace, she said. I will not leave my mother. The river mother eye darkened. Then, be ready, child. The wind hollowed, the waters swayed, for the river would not wait forever. Yua ran back to the palace, her heart pounding. She had barely stepped through the gate when the sky turned black. The air grew heavy. Then the rain began. It was not ordinary rain. It came in heavy, crushing waves, flooding the streets, drowning the fields. The river had been denied its child, and now it was angry. People screamed. Guards rushed to protect the palace, but the water rose higher and higher. Queen Mnena ran to her daughter. "What have you done?" she cried. Tears filled Yua's eyes. "I could not leave you," she whispered. The queen held her tight, but outside the water raged. The river would not stop until it had claimed what was its own. The flood waters reached the palace walls. People climbed to rooftops praying for mercy. Yua knew she was the only one who could stop this. She turned to her mother, her hands shaking. "I must go," she whispered. Queen Mnena's grip tightened. "No," she begged. "There must be another way." Your tears fell like the rain. "This is my fate," she said. She pulled away and ran through the rising water towards the river. The moment she reached the shore, the storm grew still. The river mother was waiting. "You understand now, don't you?" she said. Yua nodded, her heart breaking. "I am yours," she whispered. She stepped into the water. It wrapped around her, warm and gentle. She took one last look at the palace, at her mother, then, with a final breath, she let go. The water swallowed her whole, and just like that, the river was calm once more. The flood water receded, the land dried, the people whispered in awe. Queen Mnena stood at the river's edge, tears falling down her face. Her daughter was gone. The palace was silent. The halls felt empty. Days passed, then weeks, then months. But Mnena never stopped coming to the river. One night, as she sat by the river, she heard a voice. "Mama?" Her breath caught. The river rippled, and from its depths a figure rose. It was Yua, her skin shimmering with light. Her hair flowed like water. She was no longer just a girl. She was something more, something greater. Nena reached for her, tears in her eyes. "My child," she whispered. Yua smiled. "I will always be your child," she said, "but I am also the river now." And with that, she disappeared beneath the waves. Years passed. The story of Yua, the girl who belonged to both the land and the water, became a legend. People said if you stood by the river on a quiet night, you could still hear her voice in the waves. And sometimes, when the moon was full, a woman in blue rise from the water, her eyes shining like the stars. She was the river's daughter. She was the guardian of the waters. She was the princess who had become a goddess. And though she was gone from the palace, her spirit would never leave the land she loved. For the river does not forget, and neither did she.